Hey guys, tonight we're taking a strange little turn into a dimly lit room where time feels stuck, like someone pressed pause a few hundred years ago. There's a musky scent of lacquer, dry wood, and something metallic in the air. And there, under the flickering glow of a lone paper lantern, rests a broken sword. Its blade is cracked clean through the middle, but here's the weird part. Instead of being tossed out, it's been repaired. And not just glued back together with hardware store epoxy. No, this thing's been stitched with molten gold, like a crack filled with sunlight. Yes, we're talking about how samurai repaired their swords with actual gold dust. And no, you wouldn't survive 5 minutes in this world, not just because of the swords or the rules, but because these people took tea and poetry more seriously than you take your phone battery percentage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far this sleepy little journey goes. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward toward the broken sword. Its handle is wrapped in faded black silk, and the golden seam along its blade pulses faintly, like it remembers being whole. You reach out, not to touch, of course, you're not that brave, but to study it. The crack is elegant, deliberate, almost like it's showing off. The thing is, you've seen Kintsugi before, maybe on some influencer's TikTok cup or in a bookstore's self-help aisle, but never like this. Not on something meant to kill. That contrast pulls you in until the air shifts, the lantern flickers, and suddenly the floorboards groan under your feet as though they remember a different century. You're not in the room anymore. You're in a courtyard. It's early morning, mist curling around stone lanterns and plum trees. A man in layered robes kneels in silence, sword across his lap. His head is bowed, but not in shame. No, it's the posture of someone waiting. Behind him, the doors to a small dojo slide open with a sharp wooden clack. He's a samurai. You know this not because of the sword or the armor, but because he's completely still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. His name. You don't know yet, but his sword is cracked, and that's where we begin. See, in feudal Japan, a broken katana wasn't just an inconvenience. It wasn't like dropping your phone and thinking, I'll get a new one. A sword was an extension of a samurai's soul. More than a tool, more than a weapon, it was proof of who you were, which meant breaking it was almost like breaking yourself. But this samurai doesn't look angry or ashamed. He looks patient, which is wild, considering how many things in this world required the opposite. The Sengoku era, for instance, just a few decades of non-stop civil war, warlords backstabbing each other like it was a national hobby, and honor codes more confusing than tax law. You try surviving that with your sense of calm intact. So why didn't he throw the sword away? Why didn't he just get a new one, shiny and perfect? Because of a philosophy that goes against everything you were probably taught, that a thing broken, then repaired, is more valuable than if it had never broken at all. That's the art of Kintsugi. You follow him to a small outbuilding, quiet as a whisper. Inside is a low table, and across it sits a man in ink-stained robes, his fingers speckled with lacquer. He's a urushi-shi, a craftsman in lacquer and gold. Not a swordsmith, not a warrior, but in his hands, broken things come back changed. You watch as he examines the blade. He nods slowly, with the kind of gravity people usually reserve for diagnosis or poetry. Then he begins. First he cleans the crack with something sticky, tree sap resin. Not just any sap, but urushi, tapped from the Toxicodendron vernicifluum tree. Yes, toxic is in the name. This stuff can cause skin rashes that make poison. Ivy look like moisturizer. But hey, beauty has always had a terrible skincare routine. Then comes the gold. Not melted in pools, but ground into powder, ultra-fine, shimmering like stardust. The craftsman mixes it with lacquer until it's a slow, heavy liquid, then traces it delicately into the crack like he's inking a secret into the blade. He doesn't rush. This isn't a process of fixing. It's a ritual of revealing. You feel your breath slow, your thoughts quiet, as if the sword's silence is contagious. And as he works, something becomes clear. This isn't about hiding damage. It's about celebrating it. The flaw becomes a feature. The wound becomes art. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some schools of samurai thought a broken blade meant a broken man. They demanded replacements, fresh steel, unmarked, unstained by failure. But others, especially those drawn to the wabi-sabi aesthetic, beauty in imperfection, saw in Kintsugi a kind of bravery. Not just survival, but endurance with grace. Even today, historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or only symbolic, an elite art or a deeper cultural value. But as you watch the craftsman's fingers move steady as river stones, it's hard not to believe in its power. The blade is finished hours later. The crack now glows softly with gold. It hasn't erased the break, it's highlighted it. And somehow the sword looks more alive. You exhale and somewhere in the stillness you hear it, faintly but there, the clink of metal on metal. A battlefield is coming, but not yet. For now you rest beside a sword that chose not to hide its past. And in the silence the gold gleams like the last word in a poem. You're no longer in that quiet little room. Now you're standing in the middle of a vast training yard, surrounded by tall wooden walls and sloping tile roofs that curve like frozen waves. The sound of steel on steel echoes in steady rhythm. Clink, clash, clink, like a metal heartbeat. Young samurai are training in the early light, sweat streaking down their necks. Their shouted battle cries slicing through the mist like arrows. You barely dare to breathe, not out of fear, well, maybe a little, but because everything here feels sacred. Every movement carries weight. Every step feels choreographed by centuries of discipline. Their eyes are sharp, focused, as if they could cut through you with a glance. Luckily, you're invisible here. Like a whisper the wind forgot to carry, this is the world of warriors in silence, the kind people now call samurai. But don't get it twisted. These weren't just sword-swinging action heroes from anime or dusty textbooks. They were living. Symbols of discipline, duty, and a touch of terrifying calm. It's like everyone here's been rehearsing their own death monologue since childhood. And here's the thing, you remember that broken sword from earlier? In this world, it wasn't just a crack in metal, it was a crack in identity. To break, your sword meant you'd broken part of yourself. In modern terms, it's like your phone screen shattering, your Wi-Fi going out, your playlist disappearing. But if all of those were tied to your soul, losing your katana wasn't just inconvenient. It was shameful, and shame was deadly. Samurai followed Bushido, the way of the warrior. Not a chill little guidebook, but a full-on spiritual operating system. It combined Confucian loyalty, Buddhist acceptance of death, and Shinto reverence for nature. That's like having a therapist, life coach, and high priest all yelling at you in one voice. Do not mess this up. One of the strictest rules, never let your sword touch the ground, even accidentally. There are stories, actual accounts, of samurai committing seppuku, ritual suicide, just for letting their blade fall during a bow. I mean, next time you drop your fork at dinner, be grateful you're not doing it under feudal Japanese law. So, what do you do if your sword breaks? You have two choices, replace it or redeem it. And for some, that second option was the only way they could look at themselves again in the mirror or in the eyes of their ancestors. You start to notice someone different in the training yard. He's not the strongest, not the fastest, but there's a calm around him, the kind you recognize from the lacquer craftsman in the last section. He moves like the wind would ask permission to pass him, and you just know, if his sword broke, he wouldn't hide the scar. He'd gild it. He'd make the floor a signature, because some warriors believed in something deeper than perfection. You slip out of the yard and wander through a wooden corridor, following the sound of boiling water and hushed voices. In a resting room you overhear a quiet tale, told like a ghost story by candlelight. There once was a samurai who lost everything, his family, his land, his honor, in a single battle. His sword shattered during the fight. He could have chosen death. Instead, he wandered for months, searching for a craftsman willing to repair it, but with one condition: the crack must remain visible. Not covered, not erased, highlighted in gold. They say he wore that sword every day for the rest of his life but never drew it again. Was it true? Historians still debate it. Some claim it's a parable stitched together from scraps of poetry and grief. Others say it's recorded in temple archives. Either way, it left behind a truth. In a culture where death was an art form, survival, flawed, cracked, gilded survival, was something quietly revolutionary. You step back into the corridor. Outside, a breeze catches the edge of a paper door. You pass by a still pond where the sky looks like it's holding its breath, and in that silence you hear it again, the faint memory of a blade snapping, not the sound of failure, but the sound of beginning. You hear footsteps before you see anything, slow, measured steps on wooden planks. You're inside a traditional house now, the air thick with incense and the creak of time. A man is approaching. He doesn't walk like a warrior. He walks like someone who listens more than he speaks. He's an old swordsmith. His kimono is dark, stained with smoke and lacquer, and his hands look like they've shaped centuries. Thick fingers, calloused palms, scars where steel has kissed skin, too closely. But in those hands there's something oddly gentle, like they've learned how to hold violence without becoming it. He walks past you, not seeing you, and you follow. He steps into his workshop. It's dim, but every surface gleams faintly. You see a blade resting on a stand, broken, split right at the middle. Not shattered, just interrupted, like it stopped believing in itself halfway through a sentence, and that's when you see it. The gold. He's already begun repairing it. Using lacquer mixed with powdered gold dust, Kintsugi, he's slowly sealing the fracture. His brush moves like a monk's prayer. He's not hiding the break, he's elevating it. And the strange part, he's not even treating it like a weapon anymore. It's more like a story he's trying to finish properly. You sit cross-legged in the corner of the workshop, silent, invisible. He tells no one what he's doing. He just works. You learn that this old man, once upon a time, forged swords for great generals. His signature is still etched on blades in imperial collections. But years ago, during a siege, one of his finest swords snapped in combat. The warrior who owned it died. The sword returned to him bloodied, broken. He stopped forging after that. It took him years to even touch another blade. And then one day he decided he wouldn't make new swords. He'd only repair old ones, but not with deception, not the way some smiths did, blending metal to hide flaws. No, he would honor the damage, make it part of the beauty. There's something poetic about that, right? Like your old phone screen. Cracking, but instead of replacing it, you trace the fracture lines with glitter and carry it like a badge of survival. He tells himself, though only in the silence of his work, that every blade he mends is a conversation with time. Every crack is a memory refusing to fade, and sometimes he sings while he works. Low, broken melodies that don't seem to belong to any particular song. You don't understand the words. Maybe they're not even words. Maybe they're just the sound of someone who remembers too much. Suddenly he stops. His brush freezes mid-air. He looks at the gold seam he just painted and breathes out, like he's let go of a ghost. This isn't just restoration, it's resurrection. You glance around the workshop and see dozens of blades in various stages of repair. Some snapped cleanly, others twisted by fire, all of them shining now with thin golden threads, like lightning caught in steel. And then, it hits you. You've entered a place where damage isn't weakness, where the flaw is the feature. And yeah, I know today that'd be the kind of quote you'd see on an inspirational coffee mug next to your laptop. But here it's real. It's molten. It's sharp. You could cut yourself on it if you're not careful. The old man carefully sets the newly sealed sword back on its rack. He lights another stick of incense, bows slightly to the blade, then turns away. Outside, it's raining. Thin sheets of silver falling across the roof tiles, whispering like secrets. You follow him to the doorway and stand there together, watching the storm. The rain sounds like it's cleansing everything. Roofs, streets, regrets. He doesn't say a word, and yet, somehow, you feel like you've heard an entire story. Historians still argue about the origins of Kintsugi. Some claim it began with a shogun's broken tea bowl. Others trace it to Buddhist monks mending temple relics. No one can agree on exactly when or why, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the truth isn't the when, but the why it stayed. The idea that something broken could be made beautiful again. You glance down at the sword by the door. Its gold seam catches the faint light, glowing softly in the shadows. It's not perfect, but it's something better. It's whole. The rain fades, not all at once, but like a song forgetting its last note. You step into the wet courtyard. The stone beneath your feet is still warm from earlier sun, slick with water now, catching reflections of old lanterns and passing clouds. You don't know where you're going, but your feet do. You walk through a narrow alley past weathered wooden signs and fabric curtains swaying in the breeze. The scent of something rich and familiar lingers. Grilled fish, soy sauce, smoke. It's evening now. Somewhere a bell chimes, and then you're inside a tea house, but not the kind with soft music and overpriced cookies. This one's quiet, like really quiet, except for the clink of ceramic and the slow, almost sacred sound of tea being poured. You're surrounded by samurai, not the kind in armor, the kind who've traded helmets for robes, swords for silence, retired warriors, men who've survived, and every single one of them has a scar. Some you can see, across brows, down jaws, snaking beneath sleeves. Others you can only feel, hovering in the air between glances, in the way their hands tremble ever so slightly before lifting a teacup. You sit, unseen, between two of them. One speaks, voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "She broke it," he says. "Split it clean in half during the duel." The other nods slowly. "You kept it?" "Of course I kept it," the first replies. "Would you throw away your own shadow?" They chuckle, dry, raspy sounds, but there's nothing mean in it. Just memory. You realize they're not talking about women or wives. They're talking about swords. Turns out, not all sword breaks happened in war. Sometimes it happened during practice. Sometimes in drunken brawls. Sometimes during duels over honor or love or things far pettier than they'd like to admit. And when that happened, they had a choice: throw it away and pretend it never happened, or honor the story of the break. One of them leans forward, revealing the hilt of a katana wrapped in dark cloth at his side. You think it's just decorative, until you catch a glimmer of something near the guard, thin golden seams, like veins beneath skin. He repaired it, or someone did. Maybe the old swordsmith from earlier. You wonder how many of these old men are walking around with broken swords made whole again, not for fighting, just for remembering. And the tea. It's more than tea. It's ritual. Each pour, each sip is a way of saying, "I'm still here. I survived. I carry the past and I'm not ashamed of its weight." Someone behind you coughs, a sharp, wet sound that tells you this body won't last many more winters. But the sword by his side gleams with gold. It will outlast him. It will tell his story long after he's gone. You look at the walls of the tea house. Hanging there, between scrolls and calligraphy, are fragments of old blades, broken tips, jagged edges, each sealed with gold, framed like family portraits. This isn't a tea house, it's a museum of survival, and as the night deepens, you hear more stories, some whispered, others only hinted at, through pauses and silences. One man admits he once buried his sword after it broke, unable to face it. Years later, he dug it up. The soil had left black streaks across the steel. He cried when he saw it, not because it was ruined, but because it waited for him. He took it to a Kintsugi master, not to erase the shame, but to forgive it. You sit there a long while, letting the steam from the tea curl around your thoughts, and you realize something important. In a culture obsessed with perfection, these warriors have found meaning not in being unbroken, but in breaking and returning and choosing to wear their wounds like gold. Modern life doesn't always make room for that, does it? You mess up, people cancel you. You stumble, people forget you. We all want to be polished, shiny, flawless, Instagram filtered into oblivion. But maybe the samurai knew something we forgot, that the crack isn't the end of the story. It's the place where the light gets in. You leave the tea house quietly. The wooden door slides shut behind you, and the world outside is hushed, like the ground itself has been listening. The air smells of pine and old paper. Somewhere nearby you hear a crow call once, sharp and distant, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. You walk on and the scenery changes again. Now you're in a small village tucked between green hills and narrow rivers, the kind of place where people know when the rice is ready by the way the wind moves. You pass shrines worn smooth by generations of prayer and children chasing dragonflies barefoot through the fields. And then you see her, a woman sitting alone under a cherry blossom tree, dressed in layers of soft grey. In her lap is a tanto blade, shorter than a katana but no less dangerous. She runs a cloth gently along the metal, though the edge is dull, clearly long retired from its original purpose. She doesn't notice you, but you stop, watching her, because her hands are doing something strange. At first you think she's cleaning it, but no, she's restoring it, carefully brushing lacquer into a thin crack down the blade's center, then dusting the line with powdered gold. You've seen this before, of course, but never from someone like her. She's not a warrior. She's the daughter of one. Her father fought in the last campaign before peace settled over the region. He died not from a blade, but from sickness, weeks after returning. The sword he carried broke during his final battle, and she kept it. Not because it was valuable, because it was his. Years later, she taught herself the art of Kintsugi, not to sell repaired bowls at markets, but to fix this sword. This one, cracked blade that held the echo of her father's grip. His sweat, his fear, his silence. Historians rarely talk about people like her, the ones who never held titles or won battles, but who carried the aftermath. And yet here she is, another guardian of the broken. Her story reminds you of an old record, tucked away in monastery scrolls, a widow in the 17th century who mended her husband's blade and passed it down not as a weapon, but as a wedding gift to her daughter. Generations later, that sword, with its gold vein still shining, was buried beside a poet who'd written verses about loss. Whether that tale is truth or just a pretty thread woven by monks with too much ink, no one agrees. But it lingers. You watch as the woman sets the blade down on a cloth and closes her eyes. She's not crying, but there's a weight in her stillness, like grief that's learned how to sit politely, and something inside you softens. Because this isn't just a story about swords. It's a story about what people do when things break, and they don't. It's about how we keep going, even when the crack runs right through the center of our lives. You walk again, slower this time. The sun is lower now, casting long gold shadows across the dirt paths. You pass a shop selling old combs and hairpins. A man sits carving patterns into lacquered bowls, some of them repaired, others cracked deliberately to be filled with gold. For aesthetics, for philosophy, for a gentle reminder. Even when something shatters, it doesn't mean it failed, and just when you think you've left the sword behind, you hear a sound, faint, metallic, like the echo of memory. You follow it. To a small shrine where people leave offerings, rice, coins, origami cranes, and hanging from the eaves, blades, old ones, fractured, bent, worn from time, all repaired, each glowing with its own thin line of gold. You feel something stir, not awe exactly, not sadness either, just a quiet acknowledgement. This world, the one you're wandering through, is held together not by perfect things, but by things that chose not to disappear after they broke. And maybe, just maybe, so are you. Night falls like a slow breath over the hills. The sky melts into indigo and stars begin to blink awake one by one. Soft, ancient things that don't care what kind of day you had. The road ahead narrows, and the trees crowd in close, like old friends leaning in to whisper secrets. You're walking through a forest now. Not the spooky kind, the quiet, respectful kind, the kind that's seen things. Leaves rustle above you, and the wind smells like cedar and thyme. Somewhere in the distance you hear the low hoot of an owl, and closer, your own footsteps, careful and deliberate on the path. And then, torchlight, a dozen flames glowing ahead like fireflies trapped in glass. You approach a clearing and find a circle of samurai standing around a wooden platform. On the platform lies a sword, a real one. Long, curved, wickedly elegant, but broken. This is no casual gathering, this is a ritual, a Saihai no Shukatsu, a sword's funeral. You've stumbled upon a rite rarely witnessed outside faded records, when a blade that has served long and faithfully can no longer be used even after repairs, it is given a final moment of honor before being retired, or buried, or burned. You step closer, hidden by the shadows of old pines. One by one, the warriors bow to the broken sword. They don't speak. They don't need to. Each of them lays something beside the blade, a strip of silk, a sprig of pine, a pinch of ash, small symbols of respect. You don't recognize all the gestures, but you feel the meaning. It's a goodbye. Not just to steel, but to what the steel meant. You realize this blade had a name, they always do, not like Kevin or Brenda, nothing quite that cozy, but names carved into legend. Whisperfang, Moonlight Silence, Grief Singer. Names that say more about the person who named them than the sword itself. This one was called Tasukeru, to save. Its owner died last winter, defending a village from a landslide, not a battle, just mud and gravity. He used the blade not to fight, but to dig, to break down doors, to hold up beams. It cracked in two during the rescue, but it did save. The sword did what it was meant to do, and now it rests. A young woman in ceremonial robes steps forward. Her hands are steady. She's not a samurai, probably a priestess trained in Kanushi rites. She brushes lacquer over the fractured metal. Then gold. A single final seam. Even in death the blade is honored. Even in its final moment it gleams. Historians still bicker over whether such ceremonies were widespread or isolated, regional customs. Some argue they were symbolic, not literal. The funerals were only metaphors written into poetry. Others claim to have found remnants of cremated swords buried with their owners, their gold veins still visible in the ashes. You don't care which version is right, because right now, this is real. You watch as the samurai raise their torches and begin to chant, low rhythmic syllables that roll like thunder in slow motion. Not mourning, not celebration, just acknowledgement. The sword is lifted from the platform and carried away, wrapped in linen and silence. And that's when you notice it. Every warrior here has a repaired sword by their side. Not a single one. Gleams with factory-fresh perfection. All of them bear the signs of use, of failure, of return. Gold veins, burnished handles, scratches left unbuffed. And you start to wonder. Maybe that's what strength looked like back then. Not unbroken steel, but steel that learned how to survive being broken. You stay in the forest long after the torches fade. The night wraps around. You like a soft blanket, and the silence settles deep into your bones. Above you the stars seem to pulse, not with answers, just with presence. Like they're keeping watch, the way old swords once did. You wake up to the sound of distant laughter, low, gruff, the kind that comes from bellies and shared secrets. The forest is gone now. You're standing in a marketplace. It's early morning. Sunlight spills like warm tea over the rooftops, and the smell of grilled mochi and pickled plums drifts through the air like a gentle promise. You're not alone anymore. The streets are alive. Vendors call out their specials in sing-song voices. A dog trots by with a sandal in its mouth. A little boy waves a wooden sword at his sister, shouting something about being a great general. You move through the crowd, unnoticed, half dreaming, and then you see it. A sword shop tucked between a fishmonger and a stall selling hairpins. It's small, modest, definitely not touristy, and inside it smells like metal and old wood and lacquer. You step through the doorway, and the bell above you gives a single clear chime. Behind the counter is a man you wouldn't notice at first. He looks like a retired postman, wrinkled, quiet, slow in his movements, but the moment he picks up a blade, the air changes. Suddenly he's not a shopkeeper. He's a smith, not the kind that smelts raw steel, the kind that brings steel back on. The wall behind him hangs swords of every size, some long and slender, others stout and curved, all of them broken once, all of them whole now. You can see the golden seams from here, snaking through them like veins of lightning frozen mid-strike. He gestures for you to come closer, then holds out a blade. It's nothing flashy. Plain hilt, modest guard. But the fracture down the middle has been mended with a line of powdered gold so fine it glows. You hold it. It's heavier than it looks. The kind of heavy that makes your wrist tremble, not from weight but from story. This one belonged to a merchant, the smith says, voice low and cracked like dried paint. He carried it across mountains, broke it falling from a horse. You raise an eyebrow, and still brought it here. The smith smiles. He said the sword reminded him of the climb, not the fall. There it is again, that quiet truth humming beneath everything. These blades aren't about war anymore. They're about memory, and the smith, he's a kind of therapist for metal, a restorer of dignity, a midwife for stories that almost ended. You wander through the shop, each sword has a tag, not a price but a name, not the weapon's name, the story's name. Edge of regret. Rain that never came. She said, "Wait." You pause in front. Of that last one. The blade is thin, elegant, repaired along its length with an almost floral golden line. Like a vine blooming along a crack, the smith speaks again. He waited. She didn't return. But he kept the sword. Your chest aches. A little, not from sadness. From recognition. Because haven't we all waited for something that never came back? And maybe that's what these swords are. Not just tools, or relics, or pretty metaphors. They're keepsakes from the people we used to be, tokens from the versions. 5 ourselves who got hurt and healed and remembered anyway. The smith wraps the sword gently in cloth and places it back on the wall. You want to ask if he ever broke a sword himself? If he ever had to repair something with his own shame carved into the steel? But you don't. You just nod. And he nods back. And somehow that's enough. Outside, the marketplace buzzes on, unaware that a dozen stories have just shifted quietly back into place. You leave the shop without buying anything, but you carry something with you, something gold and silent and impossibly strong. You're walking again, but the ground feels different beneath your feet now. Not earth, not stone, tatami. Soft, tightly woven, with that warm, grassy scent of places that haven't changed in centuries. The air grows hushed, not silent, just expectant. Like a theater just before the curtain lifts. You're inside a dojo. Not the flashy kind from movies with slow-motion sparring and dramatic ki-eyes. This place is smaller, intimate, a private training hall owned by a retired samurai family. The walls are lined with scrolls. The windows let in thin strips of sunlight, catching particles of dust like falling ash. At the center, a young man kneels in Caesar. He's maybe 20. Barely. His kimono is neatly tied. His sword rests before him, its blade exposed, its hilt wrapped in white cloth. You watch from the side as he lowers his head and breathes deeply. Once, twice. Then he begins, not a battle, not even sparring. He's practicing nukitsuke, the art of drawing and cutting in a single motion. It's hypnotic. Blade flashes, resheath, bow. Again. He does it 50 times before speaking, and even then it's a whisper. I broke it, he says to no one. Maybe to you, maybe just to the ghosts. The first time I used it. I struck too hard, hit bone, it cracked at the edge. You move closer. Not to offer comfort, just to listen. He glances at you. They told me to discard it, get a new one, that it was cursed. He smiles, bitter and soft. Instead, I asked my mother to take it to the lacquerer. You blink. Your mother? He nods. She learned Kintsugi when I was young. Used to repair our rice bowls. Said it was cheaper than buying new ones. She laughed when I gave her the sword, but she did it. He holds it up now. It's beautiful. Not flashy, not golden in the obnoxious trophy way. Just one thin, elegant seam of gold tracing the edge, like a scar that decided to sparkle instead of scab. She said something strange, he adds. Let it remind you not of how you broke it, but of how you stopped breaking it. You think about that for a long time, because that's the part people never talk about, isn't it? The stopping. Everyone loves a dramatic collapse. The aidu, heartbreak, the failure, the moment you drop the sword and it splits in two. But what about the morning after, when you have to pick up the pieces and decide if it's even worth fixing? This young man, he didn't just glue it back together, he returned to it, he trusted it again. You look around the dojo. On one wall hangs a lineup of old practice blades, each with its own mark of wear. Faded lacquer, dulled edges, nicks from years of parrying. None of them flawless, all of them still here. That's what this place is, a sanctuary for the imperfect. Gym for ghosts. Even the wooden floor bears lines and divots from generations of movement, every footfall a memory carved into the grain. Historians debate whether the concept of repairing blades with gold was ever fully accepted in samurai training schools. Some say it was seen as a dishonor to carry a flawed weapon. Others argue that certain dojos encouraged it, especially during peacetime, as a philosophy of resilience. You suspect both are true, because people are messy like that. You thank the young man, but he waves it off. You're not interrupting, he says. You're part of the practice now, and he resumes. Cut, sheath, bow, again. Like the blade never broke, like he never did either. You step outside, where the wind catches your sleeve and the smell of old tatami fades behind you. The world is waiting, but you walk a little differently now, not carefully, just aware of where you were cracked and how you came back. Evening settles in again, this time heavier, more velvet than silk. The air grows thick with moisture, and the sky ripens into a bruised lavender. You're in a garden now. Not a grand palace garden, but a private one, small, enclosed, shaped, more by intention than by wealth. It's the kind of place that teaches you to listen instead of look. There's a koi pond in the center. You can hear the slow glug of water trickling from a bamboo spout. Cicadas buzz like broken pocket watches. Somewhere incense burns, bitter sandalwood curling toward the sky. An old woman is tending to a bonsai. She doesn't look up as you approach. Her hands are gnarled like the tree itself, her movements slow and precise. A snip here, a coax there. She hums as she works, some tune older than most ruins and just as stubborn. At her side lies a sword, wrapped in silk, not displayed, not boasted about. You recognize the shape immediately, shorter than usual but with a certain weight to its presence. She speaks without turning. Don't look at me like that. You think only old men kept swords? You smile. She smiles too, without ever looking. That one's mine, she says. Broke it when I was 32, during an argument. Not a battle, an argument. You raise an eyebrow. With who? My brother, she says. He said I wasn't good enough to carry it. I threw it at the ground. She chuckles. He wasn't wrong. Silence stretches between you. Not awkward, just real. You sit beside her. The bonsai looks like it's been through something. A miniature pine, branches twisted like they were caught mid-scream, then gently persuaded into poetry. People think bonsai are shaped by cutting, she says, but no, it's patience. You tie them, guide them, wait. It takes decades. Dodgy finally unwraps the sword. It's repaired, but not with gold. Not this time. The crack has been filled with shibuichi, a subtle alloy of silver and copper. The seam is dusky, almost grey-green. It blends with the steel like moss on stone. She sees your confusion. Gold is beautiful, she says, but it's loud. This one needed something quieter. You stare at the blade. The repair is almost invisible, like it wanted to be forgotten, but she didn't forget. That sword saved my life, she says. Years later, bandits, I was too slow, but the blade held. She pauses, then adds, my brother didn't. A breeze stirs the trees. The bamboo spout empties, then refills, knocking softly into the stone basin. It's a rhythm older than revenge. I repaired the blade, she says, but not the bond. Funny how some things are easier to mend than others. You want to ask if she regrets it, but you don't, because she picks up her scissors and returns to the bonsai, and that tells you enough. Historians rarely record these stories, the quiet moments of restoration, the repairs made by those who never fought wars, only survived them. But those stories lived anyway, in gardens, in broken swords that weren't thrown away. You walk the path out of her garden slowly, and as you leave, you realize not every scar wants to be golden. Some just want to belong. The wind picks up now, not in a threatening way, just enough to shift your sleeves, to tug gently at your collar like an old friend trying to get your attention. You follow it, down a path that weaves through rice paddies, through a narrow bamboo forest, until you reach a village so small it doesn't even have a name. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nobody locks their doors because everyone knows that too. A festival is underway. Paper lanterns bob like fireflies overhead, strung between crooked rooftops. Children run barefoot, chasing each other with fans. Old men sit playing Go while their wives pretend not to listen to the same old stories told for the 100th time, and in the center of it all, a performance is beginning. Not kabuki. Not no. This is kataribanashi, the ancient art of spoken storytelling. No masks, no makeup, just one person, a stool, and a sword laid across their lap. Tonight, the storyteller is an elderly man with a voice like weathered silk. He taps his fan once to silence the crowd, then begins. It was the year of the horse, he says, eyes twinkling, and the swordsmith Taquan had fallen in love. The crowd leans in. You do too. He was a quiet man, the storyteller continues. Didn't smile much, but his blades, they smiled for him. You catch yourself smiling. One night, he says, he forged a katana for a woman he would never marry. It took him 43 days, and on the 44th day, he dropped. It. The crowd gasps. Children cover their mouths. Split clean in two, he says, holding up a fan for emphasis. Right down the middle, like fate was saying no thank you. But he didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared at the broken blade until morning. And here the storyteller pauses. The air stills. Then he leans in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. And do you know what he did? The crowd shakes their heads, eager. He brushed gold dust into the crack. Carefully, patiently, the way you hold a newborn. And he told no one. A child tugs on her mother's sleeve. But why not just make a new one? The storyteller smiles, gently. Because love, little one, doesn't always ask for perfection. Sometimes it just asks you to keep showing up, even broken. You feel that one, right in the chest. He raises the fan again. And so the sword was never used in battle, never drawn in anger. It was kept above the hearth, a golden line down its middle. And they say, on the day that woman died, it hummed. The villagers applaud, not wildly, but warmly, like they're saying thank you to a memory. You stay seated as the crowd drifts toward food stalls and sake tables. The storyteller folds his fan and turns to you. You know, he says, some people think the story's a myth, that no one would ever dare repair a blade that way. You nod. And what do you think? He shrugs. I think the world's full of cracked things, but if you love something enough, you'll find a way to hold it together. Then he leans close. And between you and me, that sword still hangs over my hearth. And just like that, he disappears into the crowd. You sit there for a while, the hum of laughter and lanterns drifting over you like a lullaby, because sometimes the truest stories don't need to be proven. They just need to be carried. There's a warmth now. Not just the kind that comes from lantern light or sake, but something else, something internal. A slow, steady glow in your chest that wasn't there before, like the residue of a story that chose to settle inside you, instead of just passing through. You step away from the festival and follow a side path, stone-paved, half-forgotten, winding up a gentle hill. At the top sits a small shrine. No one greets you, but the doors are open. Inside, the space is clean, spare. Straw mats, a wooden altar, a faded banner flapping gently in the evening breeze, inked with the crest of a long-gone clan. The smell of old incense and camphor, and resting on a dais in the corner, a katana. This one is different. The gold seam across its blade is not just a line, it's a branch, literally, shaped like a plum blossom bough, curling and sprouting across the steel in delicate arcs, like the blade itself grew around the damage instead of being repaired from it. You stare at it for a long moment, before someone speaks behind you. She fell on it. You turn to see a monk, young, barely older than you. His robes are dusted with pollen. He walks with a slight limp, but it doesn't seem to bother him. She was a warrior, he explains. A bodyguard to a merchant's daughter. Ambushed, one night by thieves. She took the blow instead. Sword caught her fall, saved the girl's life, broke right at the core. You glance back at the weapon, and they fixed it like that? He nods. It took months. They brought in a maki, artist, someone who usually painted lacquer boxes and poetry scrolls. She treated the sword like a canvas, rebuilt the edge with urushi and gold powder, then shaped the crack into a flowering branch. He smiles. She said it deserved to bloom. There's something in your throat now, like awe, or maybe quiet. Do. People still use it, you ask. The monk shakes his head. No need. The girl it protected became a scribe, founded a school, taught reading to other girls in the province. The sword's fighting days were done. He kneels, lights a stick of incense. You join him. You know, he says, some people think it's sacrilegious, turning a weapon into art. You tilt your head. Isn't that kind of the point? He looks at you then. Exactly. A soft breeze stirs the shrine. You look again at the blade, now glowing gently in the fading light. Not a scar, not a flaw, a flowering. Historians argue about this one too. Some say the sword is a replica. Others insist the story is just legend, made. To inspire, not to record. But the monk doesn't seem to care, and honestly, neither do you. Because there's something powerful about the idea that damage could lead not just to repair, but to beauty. That a sword, once broken in the defense of another, could be remade not for more killing, but for memory. And suddenly you wonder, what would your scars look like if they bloomed? Would they wind like branches across your ribs? Would they hum when you breathe? Would someone kneel before them and say, "This deserves to be remembered"? You leave the shrine with that thought still coiled around you like a ribbon. And as you walk back down the hill, the wind carries with it the faintest scent of blossoms, even though it's not spring. You don't remember falling asleep on the hillside, but when you open your eyes again, the sky is deep ink, and the stars are scattered like rice grains across black silk. There's a stillness here that doesn't feel empty, just patient. You stand, stretch, and realize you're not alone. A man sits nearby, not a monk, not a samurai. He's barefoot, in work clothes stained with lacquer and dust, and his hands are stained permanently with dark lines where pigment seeped into the cracks. Of his knuckles, he's repairing a sheath. Quietly, methodically. You sit without asking. He doesn't look up. "I used to make swords," he says after a long pause. "Now I fix the parts no one sees." You wait. He lifts the sheath slightly, rotating it under the moonlight. It's plain wood, dark from years of oil and wear, but running along one side is an intricate line of inlay. Gold, silver, maybe even pearl, designed to follow the grain as if it was meant to crack and be mended. "No one keeps the scabbard," he says. "When the blade breaks, everyone talks about the sword, not the thing that carried it, protected it, let it rest." You nod, unsure what to say. He places the sheath down beside him. "There was a time," he adds, "when samurai named their swords, gave them titles, poems, whole genealogies, but no one ever names the scabbard." The wind hushes. You feel the truth of that land softly between your ribs. He turns to you then, finally meeting your eyes. "That gold you've been following? It's not just about repair, it's about witness, about saying this mattered enough to mend. You think of every object you've ever thrown away when it cracked. Everything, every person you didn't know how to keep when it got hard to hold." He picks up another piece, an old kozuka, the tiny knife that fits into the sheath of a katana. It's bent, dented, almost useless, but he polishes it like it's the last treasure on earth. There's a phrase, and he says, "Warekara no utsukushisa," beauty from brokenness. You repeat it softly. He smiles. Even the most perfect blade will chip if struck right, but the one you choose to fix, that's the one that matters. Not for war, but for return. You blink, and he's gone. Just the sheath remains, now fully repaired, resting where he sat. And you begin to understand this journey you're on. It's not just about kintsugi or samurai or gold. It's about the unseen work of holding things together. The soft work, the quiet hands, the ones that never get praised in scrolls or statues. The work of carrying what cuts you and still loving it enough to make it whole again. The night deepens, but your steps feel lighter now. Not because the path is easier, but because you're beginning to see where it leads. The stars above you are starting to blur, not from clouds but from the softness behind your eyes. Your limbs feel slow, like they're remembering how to rest. But still, you keep walking. You follow the path until it opens into a clearing you almost missed, a simple courtyard, moonlit, hemmed in by low walls and a single cherry tree, its blossoms somehow still clinging to the branches despite the season. And under that tree stands a woman. Her armor is polished but worn, bearing the faint scratches of battles survived rather than won. She holds a katana at her side, one hand gripping the sheath, the other resting on the hilt, not with tension but with reverence. She doesn't look at you. Instead, she's whispering to the blade. Not incantations, not prayers, just stories. I carried you across rivers, she murmurs, buried you once in a field to hide from soldiers. You came back to me every time. You stay silent, she continues. They say swords carry the memory of their wielders, but I think we carry theirs, too. You finally step closer. She glances your way, then back at the blade. This one broke in my third duel, she says. Split at the curve. Everyone said to discard it, buy a new one, but that felt like forgetting a friend. So you mended it, you ask. She nods. Yes, with Kinzoku no Kaze. Metal dust blown into lacquer, then hardened. Not gold this time, platinum, quieter, like frost. She unsheathes the sword, and for a moment, moonlight kisses the repaired line. A silver arc across steel, shaped like a horizon. You can't help but ask, did it still work? After? She smiles, not with pride, but with peace. Better, she says. Not because it was stronger, but because I was. You look at her differently now, not as a warrior, but as something deeper, a bearer of burden, a curator of scars. Historians still argue whether samurai women really fought, she says, as if reading your thoughts. Some say we were just legends, just warnings, or worse, decorations. She looks at you now, steady and soft. But tell me, if we didn't exist, who carried the broken blades home? Silence falls again. This time, you feel it settle like snow. Then she sheathes the sword, places it gently against the tree and kneels beside it. Some blades are retired with honor, she says. Others are simply remembered, and the wind shifts. A few cherry blossoms fall, not in clusters, but one by one, like slow applause. You leave her there, beneath that tree, as if she's always belonged to the moon, and as you walk away, you understand. Not all warriors swing their swords. Some just choose not to abandon them. The forest begins to thin now. Branches overhead pull apart like curtains, revealing a path of stone steps slick with moss and time. Each one worn at the center, like generations of feet have passed this way. Pilgrims, soldiers, monks, and maybe even a few travelers like you, dream-walking through forgotten stories. At the top, a forge. Not blazing, not active, long since abandoned. Vines twist through its roof, and the anvil is more rust than metal now. But the outline remains. The memory. Of heat, the echo of hammer strikes long cooled, and beside it, a shelf, on it pieces. Not full swords, just remnants. Chipped tangs, broken tips, hilts burned to their core. The kind of things museums discard and collectors ignore. But here they're arranged like offerings, carefully, tenderly. And standing in front of them is an old man, bare-headed, hunched, slightly polishing a shard of steel with a cloth that's more whole than fabric. You made all these? You ask quietly. He chuckles, eyes still on his work. No, I just keep them company. You step closer. These are the ones that couldn't be fixed. He finally looks at you. Who says they need fixing? You blink. He gestures to a jagged blade tip, edges softened by time. This one? Never swung. Bent in the fire before it was finished. Apprentice blamed. Himself. Threw it in the river. You look again. A curve of metal shimmering faintly with age. They pulled it out years later, he says. Polished it. No edge, no grip. But it's still beautiful. You nod slowly, something shifting in your chest. And that one? You ask, pointing to a square chunk of guard blackened at the edges. Taken from a sword destroyed in battle, he says. The warrior died, but the Suba survived. His family keeps it on a shelf, not as a weapon, as a memory. You stare. At the shelf now, none of these pieces gleam, none are whole, and yet they all shine. You know, the man says, everyone loves Kintsugi, the idea of gold hiding the cracks. But sometimes things break beyond repair. You hesitate. So what then? He smiles. Then we honor the breaking. The words settle like ash. He returns to his cloth, rubbing the steel gently. You carry enough of these, he says. You stop needing to remake them. You just witness, and that's enough. And in that moment you realize something you hadn't until now. This journey wasn't just about the swords that were mended. It was about the ones that weren't, the ones that stayed broken, and still mattered. You turn to leave the forge, but he calls after you. Hey, you pause. If you ever break, he says, don't wait for gold. Just find someone who'll sit with the pieces. Then he bends back to his work, and you descend the step slowly, your heart a little heavier, but somehow also lighter. The road is flat now. No more climbs, no more shrines, no more ghostly smiths or warrior women whispering to blades beneath cherry trees. Just you, the hush of grass underfoot, and a sky that's finally beginning to fade from night to something softer. Dawn's not here yet, but it's near. You can feel it in your bones. There's one last place ahead. A small round house with paper windows glowing faintly from within, like someone lit a candle just for you. No signs, no banners, just an open door. Inside, it's warm. You step over the threshold and instantly smell tea, earthy, bitter, familiar. The room is lined with low shelves, each one holding a single sword. Not flashy, not ornate, just present, loved. An elderly woman pours you tea without asking. Her hands are veined like riverbeds, her eyes sharper than any blade in the room. You're the one who's been walking, she says. You nod. She hands you the cup. Then you've earned this. You sip. It's bitter, in the best way. She watches you over the rim of her own cup. They always talk about samurai, the men, the warlords, the rebels. But you know what I remember? You wait. She gestures to the swords on the shelves. These weren't all used in war. Some were used to cut rice stalks. Some were passed down through daughters, hidden under floorboards, wrapped in silk for generations. Some were never used at all, and that doesn't make them less. You look around again. Each sword bears a repair, some gold, some silver. One is stitched with copper thread like it was embroidered instead of forged. You can tell a lot about a person by how they repair things, she says, whether they hide the break or honor it. You glance down at your hands. At the invisible places where you've cracked, she pours more tea. You've been collecting stories, she says. But what do you plan to do with them? You don't answer. She doesn't expect you to. Instead, she stands, walks to a cabinet, and returns with a small wooden box. She opens it carefully and reveals a single gold flake, no bigger than your fingernail, resting on velvet. This is all that's left, she says, from 100 swords. It's not much, but it's enough. She presses the box into your hand. Take it, for your own repairs. When the time comes, you nod. Words feel too small. Outside, the light begins to change. Morning is almost here. You step outside, and for the first time, you notice your own reflection in the blade-shaped shadows across the grass. Cracks you never saw before. Hairline fractures in places you've always kept hidden, but now you see them, and you imagine them filled with gold. No longer wounds, just seams. Places where light gets in. You take one last breath of the cool, night air now tinged with sunrise. You've followed broken swords across centuries, watched gold bloom across steel, heard the whispers of warriors and the silence of witnesses. And now, you carry that silence with you like a promise, like a sword, at rest. And now, as the light lifts gently across the world you've walked through, you begin to feel your own breath deepen. The kind of breath that slows time, that softens the space behind your eyes, that whispers, "You've made it." Let the images of tonight fade like mist on a river. Let the old forge rust again in quiet. Let the warrior beneath the cherry tree close her eyes, finally. Let the woman with the gold flake return to her tea, and let her final gift rest quietly in your palm, warming with your own body heat. You are not broken. You are not whole either. You are in the process of becoming something more beautiful than either. Let every crack you carry, visible or invisible, begin to shimmer just a little, not with shame, not with pain, but with memory, with proof. You survived, you're still here, and you're learning how to honor the breaking. So wherever you are right now, curled up on your side, or flat on your back, or breathing slow against The rhythm of a fan. Know this. You don't need gold to be worthy. You don't need to be repaired to be loved. Sometimes the soft act of remembering is enough. The stillness, the quiet, the listening, the knowing that your story, like the swords, didn't end at the fracture. It only began there. So close your eyes now. Let the gold dust settle. Let the light inside you glimmer, just a little. Let the seams hold you together, softly, gently, just enough, just for tonight. End of script. Sweet dreams.